All right, everybody. We are back actually with Tax and Bourbon. It's been a while since we've done one of these, but we're going to be trying to do them on a consistent basis going forward. And today we're here joined with Justin Shore and Nathan Sosa, and we're going to be discussing presidential tax plans, and we're going to try to be as non-political as possible. Although that to say that's kind of tough because tax policy, right, is inherently political because it's passed by the House, makes it through the Senate, then ends up on the president's desk, and there's all types of arguments, debates, and compromises, and what have you, that take place in between that time happens. So, having said that, we're gonna go ahead and dive in just 1 second. Sit tight. I gotta let everybody know on Facebook that we are live. So give me 1 second. Okay.
While he's doing that, what kind of bourbon are you drinking tonight, Nathan?
So got me some Buffalo Trace for tonight. It's a favorite of mine. What do you got, Justin?
Oh, I was just about to. I never had that one, but it sounds good because it's got the pop. You know, when you pull off. I've got this here. I'm gonna show you. It's this. I've never had this. It was some new Basil Hayden, but looked pretty interesting. It's got a real good pop on there. If that comes through.
Hey, the pop's important.
That's how you know. You know, it's not bottom shelf. Right?
Yeah. One of my low key favorites. It's not a bourbon. It's a rye whiskey. And it's rye. It's a Riker. It's called Riker. It's only in Kansas. Well, I say it's distilled in Kansas City. They have a really neat setup. Basically, like it's cool history too. Like the family for a long, they were a distiller in Kansas City for a long time, and then the Great Depression hit, and they kind of like that disappeared. But then there's a like entrepreneur in Kansas City who like really loved it, and so he created a speakeasy in Kansas City that's based on the original distillery. And then he was doing that, and he tried to like make like a Riker whiskey. And then the family is still alive, and so actually they're like partnering together now. They got a massive like distillery or whatever. And
Crazy.
So yeah, it's kind of cool. You can take a tour of it. We did that. We've been to Kansas City a few times, and we did that. It was kind of fun.
Cool. So how are we looking, Tom?
Okay. I think we're good. You know, the interesting thing, they changed this on Facebook again, where like it used to just go live and it would just pop up in the Facebook group, and now it looks like I have to adjust the settings to get it to go.
It does show that we're live on. It shows that we're live on YouTube, so that's good.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm gonna keep trying to troubleshoot this Facebook thing on the side, but just to jump into this conversation here for everybody who's watching on YouTube and whoever is going to be watching on replay. I'm drinking Four Roses. This is given to me by one of our team members here at the firm, Jessica Hawkins, a longtime Hall CPA team member, and I've had this probably for about 2 years. I'm not drinking it yet, so we're going to dive into that today.
Trying to make it age, a little bit more.
Yeah, I was trying to age it. So I don't know what's going on with this Facebook thing. So for everybody who's watching on YouTube, we will be getting started in just 1 second. I do have to just try to get everybody live here on Facebook, not leave our Facebook people hanging. It says we should be live. Event URL.
So I did see one of the Facebook members posted asking if Trump has indicated if he would extend or remove the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And he 100% has expressed on many, many occasions that he's definitely going to do everything he can to get all of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, not just extended, he wants to make them permanent. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a really big complication when you bring that up, and it's the fact that like these policies are very quote unquote expensive from a revenue standpoint, right? These are tax cuts; they're not tax increases. So to do that, he's got like right now we've got a lot of budget hawks within the Republican community who aren't necessarily on board for a reduction, for basically having less revenue at the moment. Right? They don't want to have they don't want to increase deficits. They want to reduce deficits. Now, the goal can be through reducing spending, other types of items, but taxes is a way to increase revenue. So it's kind of tough how he's gonna like look through that. And he just very recently announced, literally yesterday, that he wants to repeal the SALT limitation. He wants to allow everybody to start deducting their state and local taxes again, and not have that $10,000 cap that everyone's dealing with. Now we'll see if that's a legitimate promise or not. If he's actually going to go through with that, I kind of did read that. Like I saw a couple people who read that as like, hey, if New York votes for Trump, he will, and then like he will then he will get rid of the SALT limitation. But if they don't, then it's going to be, oh well, you didn't vote for me, so I'm not going to help you out in that aspect, right? So and like again, like it's a lot of this is politics. It's their wish list that they're tossing out there. So we'll see how a lot of this ends up boiling down at the end of the day. But it's interesting. And honestly, the reason, like, this is something else to consider too, is that there's a lot like the pass-through entity state tax options that exist, where they basically allow you to like pay your business income at the federal, like at the state level, and you deduct that at the federal, and then right. And so like it's honestly been the workaround that a ton of states have created, and it's lost the government millions and billions of dollars probably. And so honestly, it was like, hey, why did we do this? So like I might be just be like throwing up your hands in the air and saying, we didn't do anything. We thought this was gonna work out this way, but it really didn't. So whatever, everybody just go back to how it used to be. So a lot of things.
Like context for like for those of you who don't know, that the SALT cap that Nathan's referencing, it's an acronym for state and local taxes. So when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, one of the new limits that was imposed was this quote unquote SALT cap, and it limited taxpayers to $10,000 as the maximum amount of state and local taxes that you could deduct as an itemized deduction. And when you think like state and local taxes, it's obviously most people think of like income tax being the big one, which it typically is, especially if you're in a state that has a higher individual income tax rate, like say like New York or California. But it also includes things like property taxes as well. So there was, again, like try not to, this whole like the political line that we're running here too is like not to just like pick on like New York and California for high individual rates. There are taxpayers that are in like Texas, for example, where they have no income tax, but the way that Texas kind of makes up for that is very high. Oh shoot, did I disconnect there? I'm back.
You're here.
Okay, good. I got a weird message on the screen. So, but like Texas has really high property taxes. So even for like a lot of taxpayers, say in Texas, they would have been running into the SALT cap as well. And then what Nathan was referring to there, the pass-through entity tax, a lot of people call it PTET for short. Those were actions that a lot of the states started to take, especially those states that have higher individual income taxes. They started allowing pass-through entities to make these elections to pay their taxes like at the entity level. That was basically a way to work around the fact that the SALT cap had been put in place. So it is kind of interesting to see that develop. I've kind of joked with everybody for a while. All the states trying to put up those PTET elections made it exceedingly complicated. And I just think it'll be somewhat humorous for, it's frustrating when like the tax preparers and everybody has to do like all this extra crazy work to try and figure out how to do these workarounds. And then they very well may end up just rendering it moot here in the next year. So should be interesting.
So wait, the bottom line on this is they want to repeal the SALT caps and just go back to not having those.
Exactly, which would make the PTET elections kind of pointless at that point.
Yeah, it makes completely no.
Yeah,
and correct me on that. Like as we're getting into this conversation too, guys. Like if part of the issue too is that if there is if there's a bill that is going through the House and then the Senate, if it's something that is not budget neutral, the Senate has to have a 60% vote to pass it, isn't that right? Correct. So like that's the other thing is it really forces that bipartisan kind of nature of like they've got to agree on quite a bit. It can't just be like a 51-49 kind of vote. And so like a lot of these changes that either one of the candidates is talking about making, if it's something that's going to like decrease taxes, which means decrease revenue for the federal government, then it'll have to get quite a bit of support from both sides of the aisle, regardless of which one is controlling the House and the Senate.
Yeah, that rule you're referring to is called the Bird rule. And so if like you can get it to be net revenue neutral, right? Where it's like doesn't increase, doesn't decrease, right? Like but you get it net neutral, then you can pass it with just a majority versus the 60% threreshold that Justice
Yeah.
pointed to. That's what happened with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That's what happened with the not the American what we just the Inflation Reduction Act. That's what happened in those cases is that they're able to do it like that, and so revenue neutral. They didn't need a majority to pass it. So it's honestly very rare to see tax legislation in the past couple of years get passed, unless it was a COVID legislation, get passed without some kind of basically bird rule implementation.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll see that go through because I know it's been a pain for a lot of people, especially in states like New York and California. And by the way, before we kind of jump into the tax stuff, everybody who's listening on YouTube, so for whatever reason right now, I can't get the Facebook thing to work. There's like some types of hoops that were not there last time we did this. So if you're out there on YouTube or Instagram, wherever you are, drop us a comment. We'll be taking questions kind of throughout this. If you do have questions on any of this stuff, we do want this to be interactive. And sorry if you're on Facebook and you're watching this somehow on replay. Next time we'll make sure we go live on Facebook so everybody joins in. But do we want to kind of jump into an overview of kind of what we see, the tax landscape for each candidate and how that might impact, real estate investors and business owners?
Yeah. Should we flip a coin on which candidate to go first?
We should do that. And you know what? I do have a quarter right here. You guys can see. All right. So who's going to be heads and who's going to be tails?
All right. We can have Kamala Harris be heads and we can have Trump be tails.
Okay. So this is tails. Okay. So I'll flip this coin.
This is also deciding who Tom is voting for.
Who's tails again? Who is tails again?
Tails was Trump.
All right. Well, then I'll take. And then it is tails. It landed on tails. So we can start with Trump.
And interestingly enough, just while that quarter was spinning in the air, before it hit the ground, it reduced its face value down to 24 cents. Interesting fact.
Ooh.
Oh.
That's why you should invest in, real estate, right? Don't keep your money all in cash.
I'll be honest with you, and this might just been because I was younger and I was like, more when I was in my late teens and early 20s. I actually used to care about quarters. I actually used to care. It actually used to mean something to me. They actually used to be able to buy something, not just one quarter perhaps, but multiple quarters. Now I just, they just sit there. They're fun to look at.
Yeah, no, it's there's not a lot of good ways to use change nowadays, I feel like.
But
Yep. Yeah, you can still, fill like a tube sock full of them and use them as a defensive weapon for intruders or something, right?
I guess that's a good use of them.
That's one option for sure.
So Nathan, you want to dive into hit some high level stuff on Donald Trump's policies here. Let's
100%. So Trump's policies are Kamala Harris's. So we'll talk about Kamala Harris's first. And they're like, I'm going to start with Kamala Harris, kind of, sort of, but not really. But essentially, she's got a lot more out there right now. But that's because she's not currently, she's vice president, but she's got a lot more changes she'd like to see happen to the tax code versus Donald Trump essentially wants to keep a lot of the same, right? Like we just talked about, like at the very top of the episode, is that he wants to basically make Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent. He doesn't want any of that to go away. And that's our current tax regime. That does expire at the end of 2025. So real estate investors, we've got a really massive cliff that's heading our way. And that's why this election is really important, because whoever is the president, whoever the Congress ends up becoming, whether it's all blue, all red, all mixed, it's going to be really important how all that gets decided at the end of the day. So it'll be intriguing to see what happens on that front. But Trump, essentially, like I said, he wants to make Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent, or as much as he can permanent from that perspective. Another item that has gotten a lot of headlines was he wants to make the taxes on tips exempt, right? So every time you tip a waiter, a busboy, he wants to make that completely exempt and tax-free. From a tax policy perspective, I will say it's not necessarily the greatest idea, right? And that's not getting political. That's just saying that, hey, this isn't that great from a tax perspective, because the cashier who might work, or the hostess who might not receive the tips, right? They make the same level of income, and they're not going to get the same advantage. And so it's an interesting provision. I'm not really sure what's going to come of it. It hasn't necessarily has not been. There's no legislation that's been released yet from the Ways and Means Committee regarding it, but it'll be interesting to see how it comes out. There already is a code section that can modify this for it to be like 45B. Otherwise, everyone would just charge $1 invoice and then have the tips, and then like have everything else be a $100 required tip, right? But yeah, that's kind of like that's one of his larger provisions that he's discussed as of late.
That's interesting. So like what you're saying kind of is like, think of like a restaurant, and you've got like, say like, okay, wait staff's getting tips, but then you have like cooks maybe in the back who are not receiving tips. Like what you're kind of saying is the weird like disparity that could arise is you've got people working in the same business, a little bit different roles, but that one of them is going to have a position that like would be basically more tax advantageous than the next one, right?
Basically.
Kind of an interesting dilemma or whatever to handle, but yeah, that is interesting.
One of the things about the tips, and I read this early because I ended up writing an article on the Real Estate CPA's website for this on the tips specifically, and when I dug into this, I read a lot of information about how much the average tip worker actually makes per year. And they're actually sometimes in the 0% tax bracket. Not all the time, but it was interesting to see that either in the 0 or 10 or perhaps even 12% tax bracket, that it's not actually going to save them that substantial amount of money. And that look, I'm not trying to be overly political here, but it seems like it's more of a political talking point and a way to get people to go vote, in a certain way. Perhaps I guess it's negated now because now Kamala has also adopted that. Right. More so than it is something that's like, I'm not saying that I think the average savings it would save somebody is like $1,000, which is not nothing. But I mean, how much of an impact is that really going to have, in the bigger picture of things?
I also kind of wondered on that, just the feasibility of implementing it, because I mean, like I think most people's minds would immediately go to like restaurants, or what, at least my mind did. I'd worked in restaurants through college, so that's where my head went. But too, like, you think about, hair salons, and like masseuses, like all these different types of industries out there. And I think it's specifically like hair salons are a really good example as far as like the complexity is, typically, I know my wife worked in a hair salon for a while. So like they're usually all kind of on their own, like they work in the same building or whatnot, but they're essentially all running their own business, right? They have their own set of clientele, and they're usually just paying like booth rent to the person who owns the building or owns the salon or something like that. But they're all kind of filing their own taxes and everything separately from each other. I think it'd be really difficult for somebody like in that position who would probably have to adopt like at least like they would need some kind of new software program or something that would help them kind of keep track of, okay, how much of the cash that I brought in today or payments come in, like how much of it was actually like my service revenue versus like my tip revenue. So a lot of like little things like that too, just mechanically that would make that really difficult as far as tracking it, reporting it. And I also think when it comes to like tracking and reporting, it'd be difficult for the IRS, like in situations like audits and stuff, to really like figure out a good way to address that. So it's like at the end of the day, whenever they look at these tax policies and changes, we talked about, needing 60% instead of 50% majority in the Senate. One of the costs that they also factor in usually when they're doing, because they have to do economic studies for that, is figuring out not just like how much revenue would go down, but also like just the added fees and like complexities that it puts on the government is an additional cost that they weigh into those economic studies too. I feel like that would there's probably like more efficient ways that they could give some tax breaks to just the American people in general that would probably have less complexity and less, reporting requirements. But anyways, it's just me. All right. So business taxes. What do we got on that front?
Yeah, from Trump, he has called for lowering corporate tax rate from currently at 21%. It's currently like, so it's like some of the I don't correct me on this. It's not the lowest it's ever been, but it's definitely the lowest we've been like possibly the last 20, 30 years.
Mhm.
Now, what he has proposed as of late is lowering the corporate rate overall from 21% to a whopping 20%. But there's another caveat within that is that he's talked about any company that produces that makes their products, provides their services in the United States, they will drop their rate to 15%. So it basically, so if you don't offshore, if you keep everything within the United States, then they're going to drastically reduce your rate from, I say drastically, from 6%, but 6% on $1 million of income can be quite a lot, right? So
Right.
it's something I think that's $6,000 right there. So that's one of the major business provisions that he's discussed lately.
That's kind of interesting because that would be, you think about like these large corporations. I think is what most people think of in that scenario of, okay, it makes sense. Like trying to give them an incentive to not push things offshore, but that would impact a lot of just it's like smaller taxpayers, right? That have, you could have a corporation that has a profit of $300,000, not, and even that'd be a big help to some of those like small businesses that are set up as corporations too.
Definitely.
Um,
It would really swing so currently right now, like using pass-through entities is the best. Is like you can get the best advantage from that from a tax perspective, because of double taxation of corporations. But dropping down to 15%, now using a C corp for real estate investors specifically, for like flippers, developers, people of that nature, it really starts to make you question and think maybe it is the bit like we've had for so long. Don't ever use C corp, double tax. Don't want to use that. It actually might start being better to be a C corp if we get that rate drop versus being an S corporation for those people who flip, develop homes, construct, and sell. It actually might be advantageous at that point because the rate will be so significantly low.
I am pretty surprised that with that, and then they're going to take my idea now and use it as their own. So go ahead, either one of these candidates. I'm really surprised they haven't established a progressive rate for corporations. Just like they do for individuals. Like so, again, if like for everybody listening that's maybe not familiar, the corporate tax rate for again like C corporations, the typical corporations most people think about, it's just a flat 21% right now. Prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it was 35%. Just across the board. Didn't matter if you made $10,000 or $10 million. That was your tax rate on every single dollar. So, or every single dollar profit, I should say. But so that it is kind of, I always felt like that was a big disadvantage to like the smaller business owners. And then that's what probably pushed a lot of business owners to want to use pass-through entities instead of C corporations too, because they didn't want that high 35% or even now 21% tax rate. So I feel like they could win a lot of easy votes if they did a progressive system on corporate taxes. But
Definitely.
Yeah, that would be interesting. But to dive just real quick into something that everybody might be wondering about right now is bonus depreciation, and that's under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. And while that is phasing out under current law, I think Trump had. I watched a video on Trump on YouTube where he was saying at a dinner that he wants to extend 100% bonus depreciation if he's elected, along with other provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And I think that is, if not the most powerful, the most popular, at the very least, tax deduction for real estate investors.
Yeah,
totally. 1,000%. It'd be so useful for like we were just discussing today with another colleague of ours. Is like gas stations, for example, go back to basically or taking a massive deduction in the first year of purchase. Short-term rentals, like once you do the cost segregation study versus just getting that like 25-30% that you get from the cost seg. Now instead of like getting 60% of the allocation, now you get 100%. Look, 60% is still better than what we've had prior to 2017. So it's still useful, but if we can get back to 100%, that would definitely help a lot of people and like would probably cause a lot more interest into people investing in short-term rental market again.
Yeah, and to be fair too, like it's something that every industry can use. Obviously, like we're focused on real estate, so we're looking at that. But as far as like it helps out every industry. So I know there's a lot again, like with politics, there's sometimes this division between okay, do we want to get on specifically the automakers side, or do we want to get on like coal miners side, like all that kind of stuff. The thing that's nice with like the bonus depreciation is it's something that's useful for literally every industry. So it's not like this picking and choosing type of situation. And it encourages our like businesses specifically to invest in making like additional purchases and additional assets and stuff. And if you ever look at like anytime they're talking about where the economy's at, a lot of it's like focused on spending, right? So if you want to encourage people to spend, businesses as a whole across the board to spend more money, it's a really great way to do it.
100%. So economists love immediate expensing. They love to like be able. They love the opportunity for people to write off 100% in their year-end investment of any asset. Like they really like, just because it really increases that spending, like you're talking about, Justin. It's like basically that means, hey, if you buy, you get a tax deduction for it, and so that's really advantageous for the economy. And the people like from everything I've read and heard, as economists love that. They love 179 expensing, and they love 100% bonus depreciation. They really think it's super advantageous for taxpayers, and they're hoping that it extends, and they really think it'll be a boost to the economy. And to that point, I know we're talking about Trump's policies right now. We just had a bill. Sure, it died in the Senate. The reason it died in the Senate is only because the Republican leadership nixed it, because they think that they can roll the dice on 2025 and have more tax flexibility. It passed the House bipartisanly. It made it through bipartisanly, and it had bipartisan writing in it as well. So I really do believe 100% bonus depreciation, regardless of whatever side we get, can come back. Trump has definitely said it way more often, but I do think, even though Kamala Harris hasn't necessarily said it, I definitely think there's a large opportunity for the Democrats to, like, if we got an all blue Congress, blue White House, I definitely think we could get 100% depreciation, or at least something close to that, back if those sides get elected, if that side gets elected as well.
So you think though that, so if you think there's a chance if either side gets elected, but who do you think again who has the stronger chance?
I would like, so obviously, so clearly Trump and the Republicans. So like this is like their like immediate business expensing, right? Like when they say that, they're talking about R&D expensing as well. That's something that is another thing, another like not applicable to real estate investors, but very important to startup businesses that people haven't been able to take advantage of because of since 2022. So like they say immediate business expensing, they're talking about that, and they're also talking about bonus depreciation. So that's what they like. That like. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, said a few days ago that was like one of the major things they want to see come out if they win in 2020, like if they win in November. So they talked about that. But so Republicans for sure, it's happening, no doubt. If the Democrats win, I do think it has an opportunity. After the discussions with Ron Wyden is like probably the most, I would say, savvy tax congressperson. And I think that he would be up for putting in 100% bonus depreciation if it was on an all Democratic Congress.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's both on the table for him, but the Republicans just have it higher up on the priority list.
For sure.
On their,
It's a great way of putting that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. We have some other like little things or whatnot that's like on Donald Trump's like proposals and stuff like here, like Social Security or tax on Social Security, things like that. Tariffs on China, things of that nature. But do we want to? We're about halfway into the session here. Do you want to jump over to Kamala Harris at this point? Now that we've kind of hit like the business items.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, just for everybody who is tuning in, wherever you're tuning in from, I know we're live on X right now, on Twitter. We're live on YouTube. For whatever reason, we're having issues with Facebook and Instagram. We'll have to figure those out for the next one for everybody who might catch this on replay. But if you are tuning in, do drop a message or a comment, whatever platform you're on. We will be taking questions. We do want to make this a little interactive. So if you have the ability to drop those comments, drop those questions on whatever platform you're tuning in to, go ahead and do that. But absolutely, Justin, I think we should jump right into Harris a little bit. We want to make sure we're covering both sides.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, so where do you think we should start? I guess we'll kind of hit high level. We mentioned earlier, that the one thing that Kamala Harris is come out in support of, as well as the making tax exempt on income. We went through all that in quite a bit of detail. The other one would be basically changing the top marginal tax rate back up to 39.6%. I'm curious, like when I see that, so for, again, context for everybody that's listening, the top tax bracket as of right now is 37%. It was 39.6% prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act being passed. So I don't think it's out of the question to maybe make a rough assumption that if the top tax bracket's going to go back to, and 39.6 is a really specific amount. I always thought it was weird that they didn't just make it 40. But
Right.
the fact that that was called out, like, what do you guys think? Do you think that that means that they're going to change all the other tax brackets as well back to what they were, pre TCJA? I haven't really seen her like speak on that specifically, but I think that would be like a possibility, maybe, if they're looking at just saying like, okay, we'll revert to previous tax rates.
I mean, it's hard to say for sure what's going to happen. I know that you're proposing it on the top, and I think the reason why they do that, and I saw another YouTube video by somebody else in the tax space say that they try to go towards like the top income earners or the wealthy, because there's something called the morality frame in life, and a morality frame is like, well, it's when it's justifiable to do it. So like everybody's like, of course the rich should pay more, right? It's the easy thing to attack, but then what ends up happening is they bait you in with the rich, right? And then all of a sudden, what ends up happening is they end up trickling it down later on as people get more accepting of it. So first, it's like, okay, you already bought into the idea of the 39.6%. Okay, so we'll just make the rest of the tax brackets go back to normal because you bought into that idea. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but the point is it could happen.
Sure. It maybe like an alternative or like a safer way that they could do that is just, keep the existing set and just add an additional bracket on top, like that maybe that's what they mean by that too, is that could be an option, is, instead of saying, because they didn't say explicitly change the 37 to 39.6. They just said they want the top marginal rate to be 39.6. So to be fair, that could be what they're thinking, is just, okay, there is currently a 37% bracket. We're going to tack on an extra one that would be 39.6. That would be above the 37, dollar thresholds or whatnot.
And something to think about too is that Kamala Harris has prior, she's inherited, but also re-promised Joe Biden's promise of not increasing taxes on people who make less than $400,000. So, like you're saying, is that like she might increase that marginal rate, but I don't think it. But like I believe the goal will be to keep a lot of the current tax brackets and tax rates for those people who are earning underneath it, right? Which is a ton of Americans. Who are underneath
That's a good
that.
point.
So that's something like, and that's where it's going to get interesting. Is that like, okay, if she gets elected and we get a mostly blue Congress, what happens at that point in time? Is that what's going to how much of the Tax Cut and Job Act are going to be kept? Because Secretary Treasury Yellen has promised that she would like to see a lot of the current TCJA apply to people who make under $400,000. So it'll be interesting. Will there be a cliff, or there be a phase out? Right? It's like if you make $400,000, but you get to $450,000, you only get half of the stuff. You get to $500,000, you're phased out. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, just from a tax policy perspective. But it's intriguing. It's an intriguing idea. It's intriguing. So I'll be curious to see how that ends up playing out. Because then, additionally, the net investment income tax, or NIT, as like we'd like to call it a lot, he's also proposed to increase that to go from it's currently at 3.8% to increase that to 5%, but only on taxpayers who earn over $400,000. So like right now, that's like the dividing line. So if you're under $400,000, thumbs up to you. You're going to be fine on your taxes. But anybody over that, right? Like Tom was saying, is that like those are the people that I don't want to say gunning, but they're going to be looking to increase taxation on you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting. I hadn't thought about like looking at it that way. Is that if they just kept the existing brackets, but added the additional one on, that would be a way that they could make good on that commitment to not raise taxes on people making less than $400K, because if they did revert to the old brackets, that effectively would be increasing taxes on people making less than $400K, because those even like the 15 and I think what was it 18%. They had some of those kind of odd percentage tax brackets pre 2018 that would all like be going up. So.
Yeah, but they also, but that was Biden's stance, right? Biden said 400. He was not going to raise over 400K or
I
tax.
think she said reiterated that.
Kamala Harris has reiterated that, and she's
Okay.
she's repromised the promise.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough.
Double down on the promise, right?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, so let's hit this one. So this is a really interesting, again, kind of getting into like our real estate folks here. So, and I think it'd be interesting to talk about this one is the something they're calling the Stop Predatory Investing Act. That would, is it quote unquote remove tax benefits from investors that purchase more than 50 single family homes as rentals. So, that when we hear that, it sounds like it's geared towards like large, funds or like kind of corporate types of conglomerates that are making huge like real estate investments. And I think the idea behind that, of course, that they're wanting to prevent these large funds from scooping up housing inventory that is then making it hard for, just local buyers to like buy their own homes and stuff like that. But how that kind of like pertains to just like what I would say, like more of like the average real estate investor, like a lot of our, clients and listeners who maybe are in the stance where they have 2 or even like a dozen rentals. That maybe would pose like a little bit of an advantage, I guess, from the framework of making it so they're not competing with those large institutional like investors or whatnot for for additional units.
Wait, before we dive into that, so that was a recent proposal because I remember that being a while back. But that's something that's still in play. They're still considering right now. Oh wow. Yeah, that is interesting because I think to your point, the purpose of that is definitely to make sure we don't come the land of serfs, right? And have all these big institutional investors and funds and what have you buy up all the single family homes, which are intended to be, for the most part, people to live in as residences. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it would give a competitive advantage to the mom and pop investor, if you will, because they're not going to have the competition of a large institutional buyer who come in and say, what, or Zillow or one of these other, Zillow was buying up a bunch of homes, and there's other companies, Redfin. I don't know if it was Redfin, somebody else buying up all these homes for for cash, right? If you're an institutional investor and you have a fund and you've raised millions of dollars from or tens or hundreds of millions of dollars from investors, you can go and say, hey, I'll just buy your house cash, right? And now all of a sudden, boom, you're going to be probably the more favored buyer in some cases. But so that would not only favor the home buyer, right? But that would also favor the mom and pop or the smaller investor who's not buying 60 units or 60 single family properties, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I don't remember seeing like specific details on exactly what they would mean by like remove the tax benefits. I would assume it would probably be something along the lines of either like not allowing bonus depreciation or like we're taking a reduced depreciation rate, something along those lines. Like, 'cause that's at least like the main big benefit of real estate.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what you're talking about, Justin. That's exactly what they would do, and interest as well. They would use I think they'd modify 163J to basically disallow more interest expense for these investors because there's a lot of leverage that's involved there, and so they would increase that. So basically, like you said, take away depreciation deductions, take away the low-income housing as well. I believe that might not be this proposal, but it's a similar proposal where there's going to be a lot of limitations on that or the ability to take those kinds of credits and be able to issue them out too.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, there was also recently something that either Biden or Harris proposed or supported, where I think it might have been Biden, where if you increase rents more than 5%, then you lose the ability to use bonus depreciation.
Yeah, that was Kamala Harris. Yeah, it was Kamala Harris.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's just another. I have to applaud them for trying to solve the housing crisis.
Totally.
But I don't know that rent controls is necessarily the answer. I think really at the end of the day, if you look at it, I don't think it's interest rates either, although I think that's maybe part of the equation. And by the way, the Fed just announced that the the interest rates will come down by 5 basis points. But how that will factor into mortgage rates, I've been reading some well-respected investors in the space, and they think it's not going to have a huge impact. That's their opinion. We'll see, but that's the topic for another story. For another time. I think the real way to solve the housing crisis, and I think we've talked about this in the firm in the past, is definitely it's a supply and demand issue, point blank, period. There's just not enough housing to supply Gen Z and the millennials who are now, coming of age and looking to buy homes. There's just not enough supply. So no matter what amount of tax incentives you give, really, it's regulatory cuts, probably not only maybe at the federal level, but at the local and state level in some cases, to allow building to happen. I mean, there's some tax incentives. I'm sure that could help that, but really, we need more building of homes. That's really the issue, because there's the supply issue. Supply is just simply not there to meet the demand that we have currently.
I 100% agree with you, Tom. Yeah, I think that's the biggest issue. The only way to reduce prices is by increasing inventory, right? And so, like, a lot of states have a lot of difficulties in allowing construction, et cetera. So it's like a lot of limitations there. So like the way that can be fixed is by relieving restrictions. And granted, like, it's like not every situation's the same, right? Maybe you can't build because it's a flooding area, so it'd be terrible anyways to have someone do that kind of stuff, right? So it's not a one-to-one situation. But I'm 100% agree with you on that.
What's interesting on that, I think, too, is we saw in some bills earlier this year that there was some talks about expanding like the qualified opportunity zone, and being able to extend that. So I'm wondering, if that's even like on either, because it's not on either one of the candidates' agendas or whatnot. But as far as like you said, addressing the issue of like increasing supply, that would be a really great way to do it. So I'll be really interested to see if there's any movement on that, after the election as well, because that would be a great way because that program is vastly successful as far as like incentivizing investors to either, construct new homes in opportunity zones or like revitalize ones that maybe weren't really livable. So I don't know, that would be it'd be great to see that one potentially get discussed or come back. I think I've made this comment to clients quite a few times and asking about this stuff, like, hey, where's things at with these bills, or like, what do you think on these policies that may or may not happen? And I think that that one, unfortunately, is one of those that doesn't really get a lot of attention, like in the media, and unfortunately, the candidates probably aren't like focusing too much on it because it's a little bit more obscure. A lot of people haven't heard of it. Like the incentives and the purpose and everything behind it is quite a bit more complicated. So it's really hard for the media talking heads to get in front of the camera and talk about that particular topic. But as far as like a really good economic incentive that also is like helping out with the supply issue, I think that would be a really great way for them to go. But I haven't really heard anything about that like in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah, so really oddly, it is. So you're right. There's not like a lot of specific attention. However, it is insanely popular in Congress. They love it. They just don't talk about it. The only person who doesn't like it is Ron White, and he's like I talked about him earlier. He's the person who is probably the most tax savvy and the most vocal when it comes to tax in Congress. He's the senator of Oregon or Washington. I believe it's Oregon. He doesn't like it at all. So my guess would be is if we get a Republican Senate and Republican Congress overall, that's what we're going to need to get this through. I definitely see an expansion for opportunity zones. I really think I would almost call it a lock in some way. I don't know how exactly. They're like, maybe they just allow people to continue using it, and there's a current, like, maybe they'll do it in phases and tranches, right? We have a current tranche that ends in 2026. Maybe we'll do another one in 6 years, and we'll just continue on after that. Like, that's essentially what's happening now with the tax code. We just punt it for 6 years, and then we just like figure out, we leave it to whoever's in Congress 6 years later to deal with it. But we might see something like that. If we get a Democratic Congress, I think opportunity zones are done. I don't think we're going to see any extension there from that perspective. Which, like you're talking about, Justin, they are a massive hack, and they really, really are advantageous for real estate investors if you can use it in the right space, or even business owners. If you'd like to expand your investments. A lot of opportunity in opportunity zones to defer tax, and then sure you kick the can down the road for a few years, but we always want to defer income, and then the 10-year hold for appreciation step up. It's just it's a game winner for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of supply and incentives, let's talk a little bit about this. Another one of Kamala Harris's policies that was proposed is providing a $25,000 tax credit to eligible first-time home buyers. I think there was also at least like was talked about. Haven't seen it in actual documents. Is also providing a tax credit for sellers. I believe that one was going to be for $10,000. And then there's a lot of like potential criteria and stuff like that would have to fall into like what type of home it is and stuff like that. But let's talk about that for a second, as far as like how how that would impact the real estate market as a whole.
You want to go first?
Yeah. So what is interesting about this is the fact that it's a tax credit. So it's not a rebate. A rebate is something that you would get at the purchase of your home, which basically would mean $25,000 you had to use in the down payment of your first time property, right? For you Gen Z millennials out there who haven't purchased a home quite yet, you would normally get, it's like, cool, you first time purchase, you get a rebate at that time. It's a tax credit. So you still have to have $25,000 of cash on hand at the time of your purchase. Now, some lenders they'll do some machinations and figure this thing out, right? And so that's what I've heard, because I wasn't involved in the 2008 crisis when this was a thing, because I was not even old enough to own a car. But there was definitely I heard that lenders had a lot of hands in getting a hold of that credit. So right now you have to have cash on hand. If you don't have cash on hand, then you have the cash on hand to do this, and then you'll claim the credit on your tax return that you file the following year. That's currently how it operates. Now, granted, it's not even the ink dried legislation, hasn't even gone through Ways and Means Committee, which is the committee that does this kind of stuff. So who works through tax and works through the policies, starts in the House of Representatives. So right now it's just kind of out there as a proposal, not even gone through Congress to have a discussion of how it's really going to be implemented at the end of the day. So they could change all that.
Yeah, but to me that goes back to the supply and demand issue. That's going to increase demand, right? It's going to increase demand, but does not help supply. So it's like you have this, and I could see the lenders figuring out some way to get the taxpayer to pledge that credit or something like that,
or maybe do like an FHA where you just have only a few $100s down, or a situation like that.
Right, something like that. But again, I mean, it just comes to me. All this where they really need to have the tax incentives, and I think we might have mentioned this before, is they need to have the incentives for the people to build. Right, that's where you got to place the tax incentives. Yeah. And I think, to be fair to the Harris and Biden campaign and everything like that, they have mentioned trying to extend the LITCH credit, making those more accessible in some way, shape, or form, which would encourage a building of affordable housing. And I think there's another program that they had too, but the building at the end of the day is what you need. And then once the building is there, I think, once you have the building going, and then that's when you have to start helping the affordability, because until that point, it to me, I don't see, bless you, Nate, if that was a sneeze. I don't.
The rapid fire sneeze.
I just don't see the real housing problem being solved, by anything but building, in my opinion.
Which I'll be fair, there too. I mean, maybe that feeds into it a little bit, right? Because if I'm a developer, and building new homes, I might be thinking well, this is great for me because if I'll have more buyer supply, so maybe. For lack of a better term, I might be willing to go a little bit more out on a limb as far as hiring more people, more people to work for me to do construction, maybe extending my lines of credit a little bit more with my suppliers and stuff like that, more than I maybe would have previously. If I was worried about for example, I mean, everybody's seen the rising interest rates that we experienced over the last couple of years. I think a lot of developers are probably feeling that hit a little bit, because they're going, okay, these homes that I was looking at, that I was constructing for people, maybe they're having a little bit less demand for those new homes because of the rising interest rates. This, it could be a way for them to go, Yeah, interest rates are, and they just announced, I think it was yesterday or today, that they're going to drop, Fed's going to drop 50 basis points, which is pretty
Yeah.
good news on that front. But still, rates are a lot higher than they were a couple years ago. So I could be looking at, I could look at it from like the builder's perspective of, well, this is great. I mean, interest rates are still kind of high. They might come, they're projected to come down a little bit more over the next 6 to 12 months. That's a big crystal ball. Like, who knows if that actually will happen, see how the Fed actually continues with their pivot. But all that being said, they might have that like little bit of a security blanket of knowing if I'm building the right types of homes, then that'll qualify for like these first-time homebuyer credits. They might be more incentivized to build, $250,000 ranch-style homes instead of $800,000 5-bedroom, 3-bath, 2-level homes or something like that. That would help people qualify for these credits. So
That is a fair point. That is a fair point. I think what we're kind of like circling around here, and maybe we haven't explicitly stated that I guess this is a multifaceted problem. Really, I don't think there's any one one trick or one incentive or any one thing is going to solve this. You have to attack it to Justin's point from you have to attack it from like if you're as a builder, you want to make sure the demand's there. So you want to make sure that there's incentives to keep that demand there. But at the same time, you need to have incentives to build as well. And I think there's definitely both ends. But I mean, just in my opinion, just everything I've seen over the last 10 years, at least since I've been looking in the real estate space, is just demand, demand, demand to the point where supply, 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 to the point where people are thinking that real estate is like one of the best investments you can make because there's simply the supply and demand, basic economic factors that are there. But that's the last time I'm going to mention that.
well, and like if you look at it, I mean, the government's a business too. It's like if as a we're all as business owners, you like to think, okay, if I'm going to try and attack something, I want like a multi-prong sort of approach, right? Multi-prong attack, or you could even look at it from like as an investor, like what do you want to do as an investor? You want to hedge your bet, right? So like if I was looking at that like from like a government perspective, I would say, hey, okay, we think that this will play out this way, like the tax credit for like first time home buyers that'll incentivize builders to build more of this like particular home style and type of, maybe it will, maybe it won't, realistically, maybe it'll be somewhere in between our expectations, like middle of the road. It'll help a little bit, but it won't completely solve the problem, right? That's where like if they were approaching it from that, okay, let's also look at what we were talking about earlier is, and this is why like the bipartisan thing is so important, is if it's like something like the corporate tax rate being lower. Like Nathan said earlier, the corporate tax rate going down under, Trump's proposal down to like 15% will be really helpful on that side of things because you'd have more incentive like from that side of things for people like, developers, and like flippers and stuff like that to use that model to have like a little bit more tax incentive to go in there and like work on those rehabs or those constructions and stuff like that. So that even if you've got, okay, if only specific types of homes are eligible for that tax credit, it kind of narrows the tax benefit, purview a little bit. But okay, we can take care of the rest of the angle over here that is kind of being ignored or neglected because that tax credit has a narrow viewpoint. To say like if we do this reduction on like a corporate rate, that can also help with a supply issue because now we've got an additional, pathway for like other types of real estate developers and rehabbers and stuff like that to take that'll still have like some tax incentives behind it.
Now, I know we've talked about how Kamala Harris wants to do a lot of tax raising, offering a lot of credits. One provision that she has very recent, I say recently, in the past month, past like 12 days, that she's announced is she wants to provide, so right now, if you start a business, you can deduct up to $5,000 of what's considered to be startup costs. What she is currently proposing is raising that and basically adding another zero at the end of it and raising it to $50,000. And that's actually massive because that's going to allow small business owners, startup people who are looking to do startups to deduct a lot more for wanting to invest. Again, it goes back to that investment that we were talking about. Is like, hey, get immediate expense for less appreciation. Currently, the way it stands is it's under what's called Section 195, is if you have startup expenses of over $10,000, then let's say $10,000 startup expenses, you're gonna have to you get to deduct $5,000, and then the other $5,000 is gonna be capitalized and amortized over a long period of time, so over 15 years specifically. And so what she wants to do is basically say, hey, I'm going to raise the cap to $50,000 instead. So that entire $10,000 you can expense. If you have even more than that, you'll be able to deduct that in the first year you start your business, which is actually really fantastic and I think a really helpful policy.
Yeah, absolutely. And for like some added context on that too, the startup expenses, so it's kind of it's kind of what it sounds like, but it's kind of broad in that for the most part, like the best way to think about it is like all the kind of expenses that you incur like prior to like opening your doors or like actually starting your business. So like once you've said like, okay, doors are open or we're operating, you're actually like, taking like transactional steps throughout your business. At that point, you're going to move past that startup expense category. And now you're into just like, okay, now we have operating expenses that can just be, deducted in a lot of cases. So to think about this, like maybe a good example is if you're working with like an attorney on, setting up the structure, maybe you're going to have partners, maybe you've got a lot of legal documents that have to be written, like operating agreements, things of that nature. Like those are all things that you would be kind of almost like lining up before you actually begin your business. Those are like a lot of those types of things that would fall into the quote unquote startup costs that Nathan's talking about there. So that opens it up a little bit more for business owners who are wanting to put a little bit more almost like prep work into starting their business that would be fully deductible up to that $50,000 threshold, because it is somewhat limited at 5,000 right now.
Yeah, it would be helpful to see that happen. I think it'd really help a lot of businesses. Again, would help start innovation. Would have people a little bit more excited, knowing that, hey, while I'm working my W-2, if I got like a side hustle I want to start, or if there's a business I'm interested in starting, but maybe they're hesitant to doing it, knowing they can do 50,000, that they can deduct $50,000, which, hey, that's not small, right? If let's say you're floating around the 24% tax bracket, that's $12,000 of tax savings potentially that you can deduct in year one and get tax savings on. And then like if you're anything higher than that, clear, obviously, let's say 32%, $16,000. So it really gives you an advantage to begin to to deduct. I just like keep
Tom's making me dizzy.
Sorry, I've been trying to troubleshoot this the entire time we've been on here to get these on these different platforms, but my bad. Go back.
No, it's good. It's good. It was funny. Yeah, it's like it would allow a lot of people to take tax savings and be incentivized to potentially even like consider this endeavor, right? Because like, look, you start a business, more times than not, the first year you're probably not going to make a lot of money. If you do, great, fantastic. You're an awesome business owner. Props to you. My hats off. But if you like, a lot of times you have to, like Justin was saying, there's a lot of investigation costs, a lot of things that go into it. And necessarily, maybe you like try to start a restaurant. There's a lot of regulation you have to go through, a lot of things you have to sort through and pay for before you can even start your business. And so that's why like having these startup costs be deductible would be really advantageous for taxpayers.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So what other big key items? All right. So just I'm gonna pause here for 1 second. I know we're gonna maybe wrap up soon, but for everybody who's out here, if you're on YouTube, if you're on Twitter or X, or if you're on LinkedIn, I ended up getting this on LinkedIn. I really appreciate you tuning in today. We will be going live next time. We will be on Facebook. We will figure out Facebook. We will figure out Instagram. But for this stream today on the presidential tax plans, are there any other major components of either party's tax plan that we've not covered that would be substantial to real estate investors or business owners?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. So I would say the estate tax exemption is a big one that people should be thinking about, right? Just thinking about that is that expires 2025. I know for a fact that Donald Trump would like to have that kept in place. Right. I don't know necessarily, like Kamala Harris will I believe that she's willing to let it expire, right? She's not going to impose anything, just let the current where it's currently at expire, and that would essentially half what we currently have. Right now it's like 14 million. It's like inflation adjusted, so it could be a little higher than that. But basically go from 14 to 7 million, which is significant for people who are in the middle of estate planning currently. So 2025 is going to be a really big estate planning year. Honestly, people should be jumping on that ball right now. Like if you've got a pretty significant, if you've got a lot of assets and that's going to be really applicable to you, something you should be thinking about, right? If you're in that range, that $7 to $14 million range, this is something you should be thinking about today, for your descendants. So that's one thing from Kamala Harris' side. Donald Trump's side, he's just recently touted not taxing overtime. I don't really think that's something that's going to come through potentially. I don't really see like not taxing overtime. So basically, you work 40 hours, anything you make beyond that, right? Tax professionals rejoice across the nation because we all work pretty much overtime. Real estate investors work overtime too, but like it's a little different, just because of the way we both operate. But that's another thing. I don't see how, like, it's been in the headlines. I would be shocked if it went beyond just being a proposal at the moment.
That one, yeah, that one is another one that I think would be really, really difficult for like compliance and reporting as well.
Much more think about all the compliance that a business would have to do really to comply with that.
Totally.
Think about that.
Gives us a lot more business. I do for like us, a lot more stuff for us to do, but we don't want that necessarily for our clients. We don't want added costs for our clients, right? I think, one that this is, it is out there is that would potentially, impact, all businesses really potentially, but like real estate investors too, is like on the Trump side of the proposals is the tariffs, like increasing tariffs specifically on China. And from like conceptual point, I guess I get where it's coming from. But if you're thinking, you'd be surprised, right, of how many things that may be coming from China, and how I would say that would affect like real estate investors specifically. Is just that if you have certain things like supplies, going up. We've all experienced COVID as far as like how much that impacted our costs for like I was working on a rehab right before COVID busted out, and that was terrible timing because like my supply costs like shot up through the roof. So hopefully it would, like, something like that wouldn't be as bad as like COVID, right? But like that potentially could impact just like supply costs, not necessarily supply inventory or anything like that. But if you're somebody who's like more in that like fix and flip or developing kind of territory, there could be some impacts for you there. With just with the tariffs. Would you guys like agree, or am I too far off base on that one?
No, you're totally correct, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the tariffs would at least increase costs in the short term. I think, maybe in the long run it might work. It might, and I don't know. I haven't looked enough into the numbers to know, but it might work itself out if people end up building stuff in America and bring factories back to the States. However, at least from a surface level logic standpoint, that would still increase costs because the cost in America, the average minimum wage, the average costs to build. Yeah, I don't see how that would not. What? One thing I don't think is getting enough attention right now is the ability to cut waste in the government as a way to cut costs. Because if you look at some of the reports that came out, I know Rand Paul, for example, he put out some reports, or he was associated with some reports of all the waste and fraud that's going on in the federal government. And I think if you cut a lot of that out, if you were able to identify and cut a lot of that out, we could cut costs and make increasing taxes not necessarily the only answer to paying off the national debt. But I guess that's just a footnote in this entire conversation. One thing I just didn't want to circle back to real quick, Nate, is the estate and lifetime gift tax exemption. My understanding of it is correct. If you do that, if you make moves now, right? If you make moves now, you're grandfathered into the current rate, right? And so that's why I think you were mentioning why it's so important. If you are in those if you are single in your states, I think it's either 12.92 million this year.
Yeah, something like that. I believe something around there.
And double that if you're married, right? Because you could combine it. Now's the time to make those moves. But because what I've realized, estate planning has been a lot simpler since that time's happened, because there's not that many people with estates that are above like the 23 million mark, right? It certainly exists, don't get me wrong, but there's certainly much fewer than 5 or 10 million, right? So it'd be interesting to see if that's upheld or not, because for for taxpayers and for real estate investors with significant estates, that makes your life a lot simpler. But if it does decrease, there'll be a lot more work for CPAs and financial planners and tax attorneys and all these people to do all these more complex estate planning. So you better jump on that while you can, right?
I feel pretty confident about like that piece again, like either direction, the way the elections go, potentially getting extended because there's so many, like you talk about cutting federal waste or government waste. Like I'll get on that political soapbox for a second. Is there's a lot of Congress, people's families or whatnot on both sides of the aisle that'll benefit from that estate exemption staying high. So I feel pretty good about that one.
I would agree, Justin. I would normally agree with you, but but they targeted the estate exemption in the Build Back Better Act, and so the only reason it didn't pass is because of Kristen Sinema and oh wow, his name forgets me. I see his face right in front of me. West Virginia Senator Manchin. The only reason it didn't pass because he basically said, "You can't approve of this." And they were going to reduce it within and it was I don't remember the exact provision. I believe it was going to be, they're definitely going to half it. So I definitely think that if we get a blue Congress, I think they're gonna come after it, right? Nancy Pelosi's got her affairs in order. She's not concerned anymore, right? And little side note, she just invested $500 million in San Francisco real estate. So that's something that's interesting. If you track Nancy Pelosi investments at all, which I do, because she does fantastic in whatever she does. She dropped $500 million into San Francisco. So it's if you can drop money into San Francisco, go for it. But I don't think none of us have that kind of capital. But yeah, I really do think that Congress will I think if we get all Democrats, I think they'll target that estate tax piece, because they think that there's a way to get a lot of revenue out of it, and I think it's a fair tax on high income earners.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Man.
Okay. Well, one last, I think the only other thing that we didn't really cover that would potentially be, hitting our real estate investors specifically, which granted would hit all types of investors, was the capital gains increases proposed by the Kamala Harris ticket here is so one, increasing the capital gains to rate to 28% for those making more than $1 million, which currently it's capped at 20%. So that'd be a pretty substantial increase. Granted, it's would only be on taxpayers making over $1 million. But I think most people listening would probably think okay, I don't make $1 million. I'm not worried about that. But something that is still kind of keep into consideration there is that, if you're making investments now and maybe they would make that amount adjusted for inflation, maybe they wouldn't. But there's potential that if you have one of those windfalls where maybe you're only making $500,000, but you have a capital gain event that's pushing you
right.
You have a $1 million. Yeah, it pushes you over that. One of those surprise type. We were just talking to a client a few days ago about a situation like that where they kind of had a surprise capital gain events because the company that they worked for that was fairly small had a stock option type of grants they were giving to their employees. They lucked out, but wound up having a larger company buy out the company that he worked for, and it caused a large capital gain event. So that's something that could affect a decent amount of real estate investors. And I know I don't remember what the threshold was on it, but was the tax on unrealized capital gains for upper income earners.
$100 million net worth.
Yep.
Right. And so I think the net worth piece is key there too, because I think a lot of listeners or constituents, whatever you want to say, hear that and think, okay, that's people making more than 100 billion a year, which is only uber rich types of folks. But it's just that their net worth would be over 100 million. So still very, very high. But that would encapsulate quite a few more people than just people making $100 million a year.
But that also impacts though. Think about the unrealized gains. Think about the type of craziness that would ensue for that. Imagine you had a business. I know there's ways that they could defer and stuff like that if you have businesses, but when I took the CFP exam, one of the big things in estate planning is how do you keep a family business intact without hitting the estate tax, the estate lifetime gift limits and all that, without breaking up the business, because you have to sell it to pay the taxes. And there's all different types of strategies to do that. But imagine having to do that while you're alive, right? Imagine having to do that like if you own this business, you own a big business, right? And all of a sudden you have to worry about paying taxes on unrealized gains on your business, or having to defer that till later. Or think about all the people who do own a lot of stocks and stuff like that. I mean, I think how that would impact the stock market and stuff. I think that's just a bad recipe. It's a recipe for disaster. The unrealized gains thing. It's even though people think, oh, it's not going to affect me because I don't have a net worth of 100 mil, but how will that trickle down?
Right. Yeah, it is kind of interesting to kind of think about the mechanics there, because what you hit on there was, you hear a lot of the comments around like, okay, like a Jeff Bezos, right, or an Elon Musk, like has what richest people in the world, but their net worth is tied up in like stocks of their own companies. So it's not just that they're like sitting on a bunch of cash. I'm sure they also have a lot of cash, like other like pretty liquid assets and things like that. But if you were to say, okay, like impose that 25% and say it was like a Bezos kind of situation, and I hadn't thought about that until you just said that, Tom. It's really interesting is if he all of a sudden was facing, okay, this unrealized, say he's got $1 billion of unrealized, cap gains, probably more than that, honestly, but say just for easy math, it's $1 billion. He would say then having that tax year have to pay $250,000, but $250 million.
Right.
So, Bourbon's getting to me a little bit. Usually mental math is my strong suit. So if it was $250 million, like logically, okay, what do you do? Well, you go, well, it's fine. I'm sitting on like $10 billion worth of stock. I'll just liquidate, like $500 million worth of stock so I can like pay this big tax bill and net investment income tax on top of it and all these other things. Which like, that's easy. Right? Like that's easy for Bezos to do, probably, even though he doesn't want to do it. But what does that do? That floods this massive sell order, right? Hits the market, and that's going to drive the stock price down of Amazon, right? Yeah. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, man, that'd be bad actually to like kind of force a lot of these people into just dumping a bunch of their stock like into the market, because it's going to, I don't want to say crash like prices there, right? But it's definitely going to make their stock prices drop. And, we mentioned like trickle down is how's that really going to affect like the Main Street investor, right? I think taking the Wall Street Congress like parlance, right? Is the Main Street investor is if you've got that 401k or that IRA or whatnot that's holding a bunch of Amazon stock, like you're going to take a big hit on that. Because now Amazon stock dropped 10% because Bezos unloaded a huge chunk of shares. So, and then like, who knows what would happen in the future? It could recover, just and work its way back up. But that is kind of an interesting thing to like consider there is maybe there's a better mechanic there that they could deploy than just like unrealized tax on capital gains.
Yeah. We'll certainly have to see. Nate, do you have anything to comment on that? I think after that, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, not all that much. We'll have an article on the site regarding the unrealized tax on wealth. Essentially, here's my overall comment to it: is that it's going to have a super difficult chance to get out of committee, right? To pass the Ways and Means Committee. Let's say it passes that. Okay, now it's got to pass through Congress. Okay, now it's got to go through Congress. Then it's got to get signed, right? If Kamala Harris is the president, she'll 100% sign that if it gets through. But then it also runs into a constitutional argument as well. And that's like, and honestly, as of right now, I don't think that it would pass from a constitutional standpoint. I think the Supreme Court would knock it down. I'm not even sure it would make it to the Supreme Court from a constitutionality standpoint. Like now it might be grand territory, make it all the way up there. But like I said, this is a wish list. Like that item specifically is a wish list item. And I'm just not sure it has the real opportunity to make it. So yeah, it's out there. I just really don't think it's a proposal that's legitimately going to affect American taxpayers and get through to a point where they're actually able to be dealing with a tax like that.
Well,
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like the sheer feasibility of each one of these, proposals is always something to keep in mind.
no, absolutely. We'll have to wait and see. Everybody who's tuning in right now, we're listening to this on replay. You have a decision to make in November 5th. You're gonna have to choose at the ballot box, which route you want to go. I love 100% bonus depreciation. I love it a lot. But having said all of that, look, if you're tuning in right now, I want to thank you for tuning in. Next time we will figure out this Facebook issue. We'll figure out the Instagram issue. But if you want to make sure that you get everything, go ahead and subscribe on YouTube, Tax Smart Investors YouTube channel. We will definitely be going live there. It seems to have no issues on YouTube. Also, join the Tax Smart Investors free public community on Circle, which it's streaming there too. So we don't have issues there. You can go to www.taxsmartinvestors.com/public. We want to thank everybody for tuning in. You can join the community there. Before we wrap up, Justin, where's the best place for people to find you?
To find me, that's a good question. I would say probably check me out on LinkedIn. Punch me in Justin Shore, and with a -EA afterwards would probably be the best place to find me.
What about Nathan? What about you?
Yeah, so you can find me on X. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on Threads if you're involved at all in that as a new platform. Like that's another place that I'm working and spending some time posting some content. So if you're interested at all in following me and having a conversation, feel free to connect with me over there.
What's your handle?
My handle is @NateSosa CPA. So if you just type that in, you'll find me pretty quick.
All right, awesome. And as for me, I just started a YouTube channel @Thomas Castelli on YouTube. You can find me there. It's also streaming on YouTube. YouTube loves streaming. It makes it easy. But that's where you can find me. I'm going to be putting out some content there. Again, thank you for everybody joining in. Again, therealestatecpa.com is where you'll be able to find help with your tax matters. If you are looking for a new CPA firm, help you with proactive tax strategy planning, therealestatecpa.com. You can click the big get started button. We'd love to hear more about your situation and learn how we can help. Justin, Nathan, we want to thank you for joining this live stream today. We'll be going live every month, by the way. Again, www.taxsmartinvestors.com/public so you don't miss a beat. And I think that's about it for today.
Sweet. All right. Good talking to everybody. Talk next time. Next month. Right, Tom? What topic are we talking next month?
Next month, October 16th. October 16th.
What's the topic? October 16th. Wow. So we're doing it right after the deadline. So people are going to come angry.
We don't know. We don't have the topic yet, but you have to go join the public community or go subscribe on YouTube to find out. So again, Tax Smart Investor on YouTube. Search Tax Smart Investors. You'll find it, or @Thomas Castelli on YouTube. You'll find it, or at www.taxsmartinvestors.com/public, and you'll be able to find about all the live streams, all the events that are going on, so you don't miss a beat. But again, we're gonna wrap this up for today. Cheers, everybody, and